Segment achat esrei nikud shalosh nikud beit. Vayitchazek Yonah. Vayitchazek Yonah. We'll continue in this segment talking about activities of personal enrichment. Well, the previous segment introduced the structure of a finite verb combined with the preposition lamed plus pronominal suffix, where the subject of the verb agrees with the pronominal suffix which follows that preposition lamed. Now, the second way to express reflexivity involves a particular binyan. This is known as the hitpael binyan. When a verb expresses reflexivity via this hitpael binyan, then the lamed plus pronominal suffix structure is not used. In the current Jonah episode, we find a narrator informing us, Vayit chazek Yonah, so Jonah fortified himself. Yit chazek is a hitpael verb. It brings the action of making strong, fortifying, back on the subject. This particular form happens to be a vayiktol of the hitpael. As with other binyanim, the hitpael is fully capable of operating in a variety of forms. The hitpael binyan seems to be a derivation from the piel binyan. This particular verb operates in both binyanim. In the piel, chazak would mean to make strong or to strengthen something. And once again, now in the hitpael, it means to strengthen one's self. There's another hitpael form which we have encountered in the past, the expression hitpalesh va'efer. Hitpalesh va'efer. He rolled himself in ashes. This turned up in segment achat esrei nikud shtaim nikud dalet as one of the humbling myself expressions. Hitpalesh is a hitpael binyan verb. Let's return to the idea of the relationship between the piel binyan and the hitpael. Many, but not all, hitpael verbs provide the reflexive of a piel verb. Here is another shoresh which does illustrate piel versus hitpael reflexivity. It has to do with the shoresh kasa. In the hitpael, kasa means to cover oneself. That is reflexive. Kasa in the piel binyan means to cover something else. Lest we make the mistake of categorizing all hitpael as reflexive, please notice the range of meaning available within the various hitpael verbs is not limited to the reflexive. In fact, some words in the hitpael have a passive meaning, not reflexive. So please do not assume reflexivity for all hitpael. It may be helpful to see an example of a verb where the hitpael is not reflexive. It's the shoresh shachach. Beginning in the kol binyan, shachach means to forget. Moving to the piel binyan, it means to cause something to be forgotten. But in the hitpael, it means to be forgotten, as if it were simply passive. We find it used in Ecclesiastes 8, Vayish takachu. This refers to the fact that even moral people will eventually be forgotten by the communities within which they lived. Please notice that the hitpael of shachach does not mean reflexively to forget oneself, but rather it means to be forgotten. This means that with each verb we need to learn its hitpael meaning independently of assumptions or generalizations which we may be tempted to form regarding the meaning of the hitpael binyan. Further, it's helpful to note that the hitpael does not always correlate to a piel meaning in the same shoresh. Instead, some hitpael words will bridge to the hifiel of the same shoresh. We find that true in the term hitvada, he confessed. Hitvada is a hitpael. It corresponds rather to the hifiel of yada, since there is no piel attested for that shoresh. How can we recognize hitpael verbs? Perhaps even from the few examples we've encountered so far in this segment, you're beginning to get a feel for the morphology. First, a characteristic prefix in the katal conjugation is hit. He, hirik, tav. In the case of the yictal conjugation, the tav of that prefix becomes infixed or inserted following the yictal prefix. That is why in the excerpt in the heading, we find yit chazek. The tav of the hitpael follows the yod of the prefix of this conjugation, third masculine singular. Next, we encounter the doubling of the middle radical with consonants whose middle radical will allow doubling. This will remind us of a PL form. And third, in the event that the shoresh begins with a sibilant, and you see these listed in the footnote, sibilants refer to those letters which produce S, the hissing sound, like zayin, samek, tzadi, shin, or sin. When one of these sibilants is the first radical of a shoresh, then that sibilant and the tav of the hitpael will exchange places. That's what happened with the verb v'yish takahu. The tav of the hitpael made its way after the first radical because the first radical was a shin. This process of exchanging places is known as metathesis. It does not change the meaning. Here are 5 hitpael verbs that you're more likely to encounter. From the shoresh halach, we find the katal conjugation hit halech. That's third masculine singular. It means he walked about. In the yictal conjugation, that same form would be yit halech. He will walk about. From the shoresh chazak, hit chazak. He strengthened himself. Yit chazek. He will strengthen himself. From the shoresh yatzav, hit yatzev. He stationed himself or took his place. From the yictal, yit yatzev. He will station himself. From the shoresh palal, hit palel. He prayed. Yit palel. He will pray. From the shoresh kadash, hit kadesh. He consecrated himself. Yit kadesh. He will consecrate himself. In the next segment, we'll see a sample shoresh spelled out for full conjugation, not just third masculine singular. Another binyan worth knowing about is known as hit polel. Hit polel is simply a hollow verb offering a hitpael form. But because of the consonants involved, the hollow consonant involved, it is known as a hit polel. In a moment, we'll turn to the corresponding appendix portion in order to study the hit polel binyan a little more fully. Before we go to the appendix, there are some infrequently occurring binyanim that we want to be aware of. These include poel, poal, hit poel, patlel, putlal, hit patlel, pilpel, pulpal, hit palpel, and peal-al. You need not concern yourself that this is a large collection of entirely different binyanim, say as different as kal is different from nifal, because for the most part these are binyanim you already know, but expressing themselves with the unique consonants of particular shoresh spelling, just as hit polel is a hit pa'el serving a hollow verb. Let's go to the appendix to learn a bit more about these. Here's the appendix portion corresponding to Achat Esrei Nikud Shalosh Nikud Beit. We'll explore the hit polel binyan and other infrequently occurring binyanim. As noted earlier, when formed from a hollow verb, what we know as the hit pa'el binyan goes by the name hit polel. Here's a table giving hit polel conjugations for the shoresh kum. Let's read it over. First, the katal conjugation, hit komamti, hit komamta, hit komamt, hit komem, hit komama, hit komamnu, hit komamtem, hit komamten, hit komamu. And now the Yiktol. Et komem, tit komem, tit komami, yit komem, tit komem, nit komem, tit komamu, tit komemna, yit komamu, tit komemna. Here are several infrequently occurring binyanim. The next few moments will give you a brief introduction to them. Please follow the footnote if you wish to learn more about them. First, po'el, which is active, and po'al, the corresponding passive binyan, and then hit po'el, the reflexive binyan. These three would remind us of the relationship between pl, active, pu'al, passive, and hit pa'el, reflexive. The names po'el, po'al, and hit po'el are driven by the fact that they have a slightly different vowel pattern, and that's what gives rise to the varied binyan names. Here's an example of a po'el verb. The verb is shoresh. Please notice this is the actual shoresh. It is not simply referring to the grammatical term root. The verb is actually shoresh. It means it took root as a plant taking root in soil. Notice the holam, sere vowel combination. And that's similar to the binyan name po'el. Hear the similarity, shoresh po'el. For the passive, the po'al binyan is used. In the katal conjugation, it would be spelled shorash. Notice the passive voice. It was rooted, meaning it was rooted by someone or something. For the reflexive, the binyan hit po'el is used, and that would be pronounced hit shoresh, with the meaning it rooted itself. Next, the trio pa'alel, sometimes spelled palal, this is active, pu'lal, this is passive, and hit pa'lel, this is reflexive. Belonging to this trio of binyanim, we find verbs such as sha'anan, which means he was at rest, from sha'an. This is a pa'lel form. We also find umlal, meaning it faded, from amal. This is a pu'lal form. And the verb yishtakshakun, they rush about, from the shoresh shakak. This illustrates the hit pa'lel binyan. Another trio is known as pilpel, which is active, polpal, passive, and hit palpel, reflexive. Illustrative of this is the verb galal, which forms gilgel in the katal, past, meaning he rolled. That would be pilpel, active. And then galgal, it was rolled. This is polpal, not actually attested for this shoresh. And then hit galgel, he rolled himself down. That would be reflexive in the hit palpel binyan. Once again, we're seeing a similar progression through these three phases. The names of the binyanim are driven by the kinds of consonants that comprise a particular shoresh, especially if it has hollow consonants, if it has reduplicated terminal consonants, things of this nature. The last shoresh that we'll introduce is pe'al-al. This is an active form. Consider the shoresh chamar. We find that in addition to the kal binyan, where chamar means for some kind of fluid to foam up, to bubble up, we also find the pe'al-al verb chomar maru. Chomar maru, meaning they had fermented. used figuratively of deep inner distress in Lamentations 1. The morphological feature of this is the reduplication of the last two consonants, not just the last one, but the last two, in this case, memresh, memresh.